Dear friends, welcome to the show Talk with Your Doc. I am Dr. Prashant Jani, and with me is Dr. Abu Bakare. He is an endocrinologist and is also associate professor at Northern Ontario School of Medicine in Thunder Bay, Ontario. Today we are going to talk about diabetes. Diabetes is a condition in which the blood sugar level in the blood becomes very high. Normally, pancreas produces a hormone called as insulin, which breaks down the sugar ingested through the food. In diabetes, either insulin production is reduced or absent, or sometimes there is resistance to the action of insulin, resulting in high level of blood sugar. This high level of blood sugar causes damage to various organs, resulting in cardiovascular disease, stroke, kidney disease, blindness, peripheral vascular disease leading to ulcers in the leg, and sometimes needs amputation and many other serious complications. In 2016, it is estimated that 11 million patients were diagnosed with diabetes and prediabetes in Canada alone. And by 2026, this number can go to 13 million. From 2006 to 2016, the prevalence of diabetes increased at the rate of 72%. And in coming next 10 years, this will go by 42% more. So we can see that diabetes is a very significant disease all over the world, and it reduces the lifespan of a patient by 5 to 15 years of age because of the complications associated with it. So today, with the help of Dr. Bakare, we will understand what diabetes is, what are the preventive methods, and what are treatment options available. Thank you, Dr. Bakare, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Well, it's nice to be invited, and I'm glad to be here. So,
please tell us about type 1 and type 2 diabetes, what it is, who gets it.
Well, typically, type 1 diabetes is a kind of diabetes that occurs in the younger age group, usually less than 40. That kind of diabetes is such that they almost always require insulin. And if they do not get insulin, they will get into what we call ketoacidosis. On the other hand, type 2 diabetes is typically in a patient more than 40 years old and typically also obese. And these patients can actually do without insulin for quite a while, depending on how far down they've been in the disease pathway. And it's only in the end that they will require insulin, but invariably can be treated with oral medications before they go on insulin.
Right. So you say type 1 is always in a young patient. So what age it can start?
Well, it can start as low as 1 week.
Wow.
There are patients who are diagnosed within the first month of being born as being type 1 diabetics, and they have to be treated immediately. If they are not recognized, they obviously will die.
How common is it? Type 1 diabetes in young children?
Well, type 1 diabetes is not very common. And in general, type 2 diabetes is the most common kind of disease. It's 80% of diabetics are type 2.
Type 2.
And it's only 10% that are type 1. So it's a very small group.
Right.
It's certainly not as prevalent as
so
as type 2
what we
diabetes.
see is most of the patients are type 2 diabetes.
That's correct. That's correct.
Now, what is pre-diabetes?
Well, prediabetes is a stage before the development of diabetes. These are sort of artificial terms that have been created to make a distinction between the levels of mostly blood sugars and more recently what we call a hemoglobin A1C. That is an attempt to classify patients into an area where they can take a lot of precautions before they actually develop full-blown diabetes. And people used to say a touch of diabetes, but that's really a more colloquial term.
Right.
Pre-diabetes, we are referring to specific levels of blood sugars. For example, if you got a fasting blood sugar that is between 6 and 7, you are a pre-diabetic, as long as that blood sugar is repeated more than once. On the other hand, if your blood sugar is over 7, you are now a diabetic patient by definition.
Okay.
We also have hemoglobin A1C levels that are classified as being pre-diabetic and levels that will be regarded as clearly diabetic.
So pre-diabetic is predisposed or prone to go into the diabetes full-blown?
That's correct. So a pre-diabetic patient is more likely to develop diabetes. In fact, pre-diabetic patients followed up for about 5 years, at least about 33% of them will develop full-blown diabetes.
33% of
That's
them,
right.
1/3 of them will get the
Will
full-blown.
become to full-blown.
So what can one do to prevent pre-diabetes going into the diabetes stage?
Well, it's now clearly established that in fact, you could prevent a major amount of patients who are in the earlier stage from developing diabetes if they would take care in terms of diet and other lifestyle changes.
Okay.
There have been studies clearly done in the United States and elsewhere showing that there are ways of retarding the progression from pre-diabetes to diabetes.
Now, who is at risk factor for developing pre-diabetes and diabetes?
Well, the most common risk factor for pre-diabetes or in fact diabetes is obesity.
Obesity.
It's the most prominent factor. The higher your level of BMI or body mass index, the more likely you will develop diabetes. Not at all every obese person is diabetic, but you're more likely to. A family history of diabetes is also a strong risk factor. And certain tribes or races are more likely to develop diabetes than
like Asian countries. We have a lot of
people from Asian countries who are, particularly those who have migrated to the West,
right,
are more likely to develop diabetes than.
Is any food is a risk factor for diabetes?
No, not specifically. Obviously, a changeover. It has been noted for years that a changeover, particularly among the indigenous population, from their natural, well, you call it natural food to a more westernized food is a risk factor. Even in the Middle East, it has been clearly noted that the changeover from the typical Arab, for example, Arab diet, to a more Western diet, or the inclusions of things like that, clearly, like Coke and all that, have increased the rate that one will normally see in the indigenous population. Clearly, also you will see that in the same population developing diabetes are the same population that become obese and develop hypertension and a few other.
So too much fat, too much sugary.
Too much sugar in a sense are contributory.
Contributory to the diabetes.
That's right.
Is physical activity related?
Of course, again, that's another great factor, which is so-called environmental factor. In the sense that the people move less,
yes,
and if you move less, you eat more,
right?
Or of course, you are more likely to develop diabetes.
Right. Now, obesity and diabetes.
Yeah.
Can you please explain more about it? Like, how does obesity affects the insulin level in the blood?
Well, the thing is that the more fat you accumulate, the less effective is insulin. So we have an earlier stage in which your body is trying hard to cope with the increased demand on the pancreas to put out more and more insulin to normalize the blood sugar. As long as the pancreas succeeds in putting out enough insulin to normalize the blood sugar, it doesn't matter how much weight you put on it. But if the pancreas then is unable to cope, obviously, then your blood sugar will start going up. And that's where what obesity offers to a large extent, because of the fat and the effect of lipids on insulin, is that it reduces the effectiveness of the insulin being secreted. We call it insulin resistance,
yes,
but it's not in the sense that more and more insulin have to be secreted to achieve a certain level of blood sugar.
Right.
You know.
Thank you, Dr. Bakare. We'll take a short break and we'll come back. Please stay back for the next part.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the show, Talk with Your Doc. With me is Dr. Abu Bakare, an endocrinologist here in Thunder Bay, Ontario. And we were talking about diabetes mellitus and various risk factors. Dear Dr. Bakare, we were talking about obesity and diabetes, and you mentioned that obesity can lead to insulin resistance, and more insulin has to be produced by the pancreas, leading to aggravation of the diabetes. Are males and females, is there any difference in the getting diabetes?
Well, in general, females appear to have more incidence of diabetes, but in most population, actually, they are probably equal if you study it very well. Mm-hmm. There is a tendency in diabetes, as seen, for example, even obesity, that the female is more likely to seek medical attention than the male is.
Right.
So, in fact, it looks like we have more female diabetics than male diabetic patients.
Right.
So that's and you know that obesity is also more common in the diabetic, in the female diabetic.
Right.
There are other risk factors, for example, gestational diabetes that you see in female, you don't see in men. So there are other factors that sort of promote it slightly more in females than in males.
You mentioned about gestational diabetes. Yeah. Who gets this gestational diabetes?
Well, the gestational diabetic patient, again, the predisposition to get it include, number one, obesity again. We always come back to obesity, a family history of diabetes, conception at a later age, mm-hmm. A background history related to certain medications may in fact predispose a patient to developing gestational diabetes. And also, if you have twins, you are more likely than if you have a single pregnancy. So these are the factors in particular that may promote the development of diabetes.
Gestational diabetes is when you get diabetes during the pregnancy period. Now, the blood sugar goes high during the pregnancy.
That's correct.
After the pregnancy, does it come back to the normal?
Yeah. For you to actually classify as gestational diabetes, it has to be during the pregnancy, particularly after the first trimester, and it has to disappear after the pregnancy. Otherwise, it's truly not gestational diabetes, because we have what we call type 2 diabetes in pregnancy. In other words, it's the pregnancy that brings out the type 2 diabetes. So if we see a patient who is diabetic in the first trimester, it is likely that the patient has type 2 diabetes. It's just it came out because of the pregnancy and the associated abnormal hormones that occur during the pregnancy.
So somebody has a diabetes during the pregnancy, and it comes back to the normal after the pregnancy. What are the chances that patient gets type 2 diabetes in the future?
It's higher than the normal. Again, it's around 30%. The patients who have gestational diabetes who are followed for about 5 years, almost 30% of them will become truly diabetic.
So they need to be followed up over the period of time?
That's right. So we usually recommend that the patient is seen at least 6 to 8 weeks post-delivery to make sure that the blood sugars have normalized. Otherwise, they may in fact retain the abnormality and have to be followed up for it.
Now, pre-diabetes, diabetes type 2, and then gestational diabetes, what sort of investigations are needed to diagnose it at early stage and follow up?
Now, for you to make a diagnosis of diabetes, you have to have a few things. Number one is, as I said, the fasting blood sugar should be 7 or more on more than one occasion. So you'll truly be diabetic. A single blood sugar, we call a random blood sugar of more than 10 millimoles is regarded as being diagnostic of diabetes.
Right.
And then what we call the hemoglobin A1C is a test that sort of gives us an idea of what the average blood sugar has been in the previous 3 months. And if the A1C is clearly more than or equal to 6.5%, then you are likely diabetic.
Okay.
So those are the definitions. So in fact, you can look at diabetes. It's a definition. So it's only when you achieve those levels that we really should classify you as diabetic. What we didn't mention is that for you can also have what we call glucose intolerance. In other words, somebody suspects you are diabetic, we give you glucose to take, we do your blood sugars 2 hours after, and it should reach a certain level. It should not be more than 11 or 11.1, and if it is more than that, then you're truly diabetic. If it's between 7.8 to 11, you have glucose intolerance.
Glucose
okay, you are not diabetic yet, you
Right.
just have glucose intolerance. So they are more of biochemical or physiologic definitions
Right.
than the way you look or what happens. Of course,
Now,
you can have symptoms.
Those
yeah.
were like for the blood sugar.
That's right.
And then one monitor it by checking urine sugar levels?
Urine sugars are pretty useless.
Okay.
Okay. They are not. They do not correlate well with the blood sugar. In the past, very many years ago, when we didn't have means of measuring glucose very easily, and
Right.
we used to use glucose in the urine,
Urine.
To decide, but they are pretty crude and not
Crude.
really.
So blood sugar is the most accurate.
is the
method.
most accurate way of
Now,
diagnosing.
what is the accuracy of getting the blood sugar by the fingerprint method, and there are instruments available in the market? Are they sensitive and specific?
Extremely, the new meters are so sensitive that we usually expect them to be less than 1 millimoles difference between
Okay.
what they give you, if they are accurate, and the actual blood sugar measurement.
So they are recommended.
They are recommended, highly recommended.
So how often one should check the blood sugar when if it is pre-diabetic, and how often one should check when it is diabetic type 2?
Well, I mean, if you're pre-diabetic, one would probably recommend that you check your blood sugars maybe a couple of times a month until we are sure where you are, but no more than about once or twice a week. I mean, for the pre-diabetic patient. Now, the diabetic patient, it depends. Now, the diabetic patient who is just on oral hypoglycemic agent, who is not on insulin, because you can be on insulin, probably requires to do, we will say, at least 2 blood sugars twice a week, at least. Because you need the blood sugars to give you an idea of where the blood sugars are pre and post meals, and you can stagger them. You don't have to do all of them in 1 day or 2 days. So that's for the type 2 diabetic patient, just an oral hypoglycemic agent. Those who are on insulin 4 times a day, will require quite a bit more.
Okay.
Because you want to be able to check to make sure that they are not low or too high,
Right.
pre or post
So
meals.
frequent blood sugar monitoring is a very important tool in the treatment of
That's right.
diabetes.
That's right. I mean, you have to know them to know which drugs are most applicable in the situation, and
Right.
which drugs are not acting well, or which drugs are being excessively overactive to cause hypoglycemia.
Right, right. Now, what are the signs and symptoms if I have a pre-diabetes and if I have a diabetes?
If you are pre-diabetics, you may in fact have no symptoms
Okay.
whatsoever. You may notice that you are a little bit tired, or if the blood sugars actually go up, but you may have no symptoms. The truly diabetic patient will have symptoms of what we call polyuria and polydipsia.
Polyuria.
Which
Passing
means
more
they pass a
urine.
lot of fluid. Okay, the reason being that if your blood sugar is high, it causes osmotic diuresis. It makes you pee. I mean, essentially, it makes you pee liquid out. And if you, of course, pee a lot out, then you will feel thirsty by natural instinct and
Right.
physiology, and you'll drink a lot more.
More
and then
drinking.
you'll notice that you are going to the bathroom and drinking a lot more. And then as time goes on, you'll find that you are losing weight,
Right.
as a result of wasting away a lot of sugar and calories. And if it persists, you may get an infection, because particularly in the female population are more likely to get an infection because of excessive urination, and of course sugar in the urinary pathway. Okay,
Right.
and if you really get bad enough that your blood sugars are a certain level, you can go into coma and die from it.
Wow.
So
Lots of signs, symptoms to look for.
that's right.
We'll take a short break, Dr. Bakare, and we'll come back.
Thank you.
Please stay back for the next part. Thank you. Welcome back to the show Talk with Your Doc. With me is Dr. Abu Bakare, endocrinologist in Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada. Thank you, Dr. Bakare. We were talking about signs and symptoms and various investigations for diabetes. Now, once somebody is labeled with a diabetes and one is diagnosed with a diabetes, what are the treatment options available?
Well, the treatment options, again, would depend on the level. I mean, we did mention pre-diabetes. Obviously, the treatment for pre-diabetes is mostly lifestyle changes to try and make things less likely to progress. Once you are diabetic, what we do first is then monitor the blood sugars. Okay? And we also monitor the hemoglobin A1C. They are standards set up by most associations. In Canada, is CDA, or the Canadian Diabetes Association, suggesting what to do. Well, the basis of all the treatment in type 2 diabetes, and to a certain extent type 1 diabetes, is diet.
Diet.
So diet and lifestyle changes are constant.
Change the lifestyle, change the diet, the
That's
diabetes might get controlled by itself. Without
by itself. You might be lucky to get control for the first few weeks or months or even more, okay?
Is it curative thing?
Not usually.
Not usually.
Not
Once you are
usually.
diabetes type 2, it's always there.
It's always there, but the blood sugars may be controllable, and then you're okay.
Okay.
All right.
So once you're labeled, you need to change your life.
You need to change your lifestyle.
Otherwise,
Otherwise, nothing is likely
not
to happen.
So once you do what do you mean by lifestyle changes? So what sort of diet one should take?
Now, what we're saying is a diet that is not overloaded with carbohydrates.
Okay.
Now, people then will ask you, is it the carbohydrate causing? Of course not. But the thing is, as you mentioned and I mentioned, the diabetes is due to an inability of the insulin you are producing to control mostly the carbohydrates. I mean, the proteins and fats are also involved, but mostly the carbohydrates. So an overloaded system already, if you add more to it, you're more likely to show higher levels of
So
blood
when
sugar.
you say carbohydrate, what diet content should be reduced or avoided?
It should be, well, I mean, we expect you particularly to avoid refined carbohydrates. Why
Refined.
do we say refined? Because those are the ones that don't even require any digestion. So the blood sugar goes straight into the system. And so we expect you to take something that has more fiber, that has more complex carbohydrates, that requires digestion, so that there is some slowness in the level of blood sugar rising, and hopefully your pancreas can cope with it.
So when you say refined, that means like instead of drinking the fruit juice,
That's right.
eat the fruit.
Eat the fruit. You're right.
Right?
That's correct.
So when you eat the fruit, you have the carbohydrate and the fiber with it.
That's right.
But if you drink like a whole glass of juice, then you don't have a fiber.
No, you just have it.
Right.
Okay.
And so reduce the refined carbohydrate, have more carbohydrate with the fibers, which means fruits and juices.
Uh-huh.
What else? Whole grain.
Whole grain wheat, whole grain rice, such things. And even if you take the rice, make sure you have some fiber around it. You have some other food like vegetables with it to reduce and modify the degree to which it will go in.
Right. So whole grain rice or whole grain wheat will be good.
That's right.
And fiber containing food. So more green leafy vegetables.
More green leaf and vegetable.
Meat is
Meat is sort of neutral.
okay.
Meat is neutral.
So
of course, because diabetic patients tend to have high cholesterol levels, we would like to also reduce the amount of fats.
Amount of fat and
that they
meat.
take. That's right.
Right. So how about protein containing diet?
Protein, we don't control as such. In fact, if anything, because the body very rarely retains proteins.
Right.
I mean, we don't retain amino acids
Right.
to a large
Right.
extent. So, but we retain fat very
Right.
easily. We retain glucose
Glucose.
or carbohydrate. We store it in the liver. So
one
that's,
fruit a day is good for diabetics.
That's right, the right fruit. Okay,
Yeah, right fruit.
don't eat 50 grapes a day.
Grapes. So which is a high glycemic index.
That's right.
So which are the fruits to be avoided?
I would say, I just said grapes. Banana is a typical one because
high
banana is
glycemic.
a high. Pineapples and high glycemic. But things like guava is fantastic.
Right.
The grapefruit is fantastic.
Apple is good?
Apple is okay.
Right.
You know. And the orange itself, not oranges. Okay.
Not oranges.
Yeah, orange. Okay.
Okay.
So those
And how
are-
about mango, which I love the most?
Well, mango is all right.
All right.
But mango has fiber. You know, mango has quite a bit of
good.
fiber. So
Right,
if you eat the mango, not mango juice. Okay.
Right. Other than the diet, how about exercise?
Well, the exercise is sort of, it's not, we now say you should exercise if you can 150 minutes a week.
150
And
minutes.
you can
a week.
divide that anywhere you want. You know, if you can do 15 minutes a day for 10 days, you've done the 150, but preferably about 150 a week. So, and some people will say 30 minutes to 45 minutes daily.
Right.
So those are the recommendations. A brisk walk, and don't have to do it all at the same time.
Right.
You can, if you're doing 30 minutes, you can do 10, 10, 10.
Now,
and that's it.
exercise, how does it help to control the diabetes? Does it break down the sugar or what does
No,
it
not
do?
really. We think exercise increases sensitivity to your insulin.
Okay.
It sort of helps the metabolism and makes your insulin a little bit more effective than it would have been.
So if you do regular exercise, your insulin will act more
A little better.
and reduce the sugar levels.
That's right.
Right. Now, once one does the diet and the exercise, and if required, what sort of medications?
Well, we have groups of medications that we have. The most common one that's recommended is metformin to start with in almost every type 2 diabetic patient, unless they can't tolerate it. We will recommend this starting with metformin.
Right.
And then, of course, you progress depending on the level of blood sugars and what we call the hemoglobin A1C. So you can go from metformin to another group of drugs. The more common one in the past would have been what we call the sulfonylureas.
Yes.
The sulfonylureas will include glyburide, glycoside.
Right. Now, if somebody is taking these oral medications, then at what stage one needs the insulin? Injectable insulin, they get insulin injections?
Well, the insulin injection at stages, things have changed quite a bit. In the past, what we did, we gave you all the drugs that we have at the beginning, and if you finish all of them at the maximum dose, we go move on to insulin, because then you have no other recourse. Okay. Now we feel that there are so many drugs on that insulin may in fact come in earlier if you agree for it to be reintroduced. So, for example, if you were on drugs and your blood sugar in the morning is extremely high, then insulin is probably the best drug to take at bedtime to try and reduce the blood sugar in the morning than keep piling on the medication. It's just that we have so many classes of medication that we can actually use. And we can combine, say, some of the medications with insulin. So it's not an exclusive. In the past, all we did was, well, you're on insulin now, we give you insulin, and you'll be on insulin 4 times a day.
People can get insulin resistance also, right, after taking the insulin?
Well, insulin resistance in the sense of not building it up, insulin resistance is always there.
Okay.
I mean, once you're type 2 diabetic, the insulin resistance is always there. The drugs that are meant to either bypass it or make you, in fact, more sensitive is what we have now.
Right.
There was only one class of drugs that actually tackled insulin resistance, but they're not a popular drug at this time.
Now, just about recent advances, is the pancreatic islets and transplantation. Can you tell us something about that?
Well, islet transplantation has always sort of been there either in a crude or in refined form. We do have pancreatic islet transplantation, mostly from Edmonton in Canada, and they've been successful in the transplantation. What has been the problem is the retention of a transplant to stay on, because if you transplant islets, the body brings out the same antibodies that damage your own pancreas. This is in type 1 mostly, okay? Damage your pancreas, we damage the islet. So you would require another set of islet cell harvest to put in more islets. So the initial success is sort of tempered by the fact that you may require several transplants to be able to maintain either going without insulin or going with small amount of insulin. So the success has not been as high as one would have expected or also expected. Maybe our expectations was too much. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Bakare. Thank you so much for enlightening us for so much about the diabetes. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us.